This is Brent. Thank you, Miss Francine. This is Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com, coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long. This is a Common Lawyer comments concerning our common law. We left off on question 223 of Stansbury's Catechism on the Constitution of the United States. Catechism, what's that? Well, that's a word in the Greek New Testament, by the way, catechism. And there's a Hebrew word in the Old Testament that means the same thing that's used. Well, what it means is it's a method of teaching. By the way, without question, there's not any method of teaching that's any better than the catechism. What does that Greek word mean? Kata. That's a preposition, kata. And ism. Catechism. It means a question and an answer. A question and an answer. And the student memorizes or learns, memorize it first, then you begin to think about it, you learn the answer to the question. And a series of questions, and each question then answers a question that the previous answer raised. In other words, for example, the Westminster Catechism, that's the one I'm familiar with, says the first question, there's a shorter catechism, longer catechism. It was ordained by Parliament and by the Reformed churches in Britain. The first question is, what is the chief end of man? What is the chief end of man? Simple question. In other words, why am I here? What's my purpose? Why did God make me? What is the chief end of man? They talked in a little more stilted terms back in the 1600s and wrote down words that are a little more stilted, a little more beautiful, no question. What is the chief end of man? That's the first question of the Catechism, the Westminster Catechism. And the answer is two parts, and the second part is the natural result of the first part. What is the chief end of man? Answer, the student says, to glorify God. And what's the result? To enjoy him forever. The answer is to glorify God. Result? To enjoy him forever. And then every question after that answers questions about the answer to that first question, and every answer after that to the following question after that answers a question that the first question further unpacks the answer that the question raised. What is the chief end of man? To glorify God and enjoy him forever. Next question, what is the glory of God? And then it continues to unpack with the questions, the glory of God, and what is enjoyment? And, well, that's what this Catechism of the Constitution, this fellow, Arthur J. Stansbury, is a clergyman. Printed, published 1828. And he had been catechized, shown what we used to have an elder here. He passed away just within the last few weeks. His name was Paul. He was 86 years old. No, let's see. Well, something like that. He was up there in his late 80s. I spoke to him in the morning, and he passed away that evening. But he was raised and adhered to a catechism called the Heidelberg Catechism. Well, that's the catechism that has substantially the same information as the Westminster Catechism of the Presbyterian Church out of Scotland and here in America and all over the world now. The Westminster Catechism. But he was Dutch. His ancestors settled in Michigan, and they came from the Netherlands. His grandfather and great-grandfather, I believe it was, and they were what they called Dutch Reformed. So the Dutch Reformed wrote the Catechism to teach their children and people who wanted to enter their church, and they called it the Heidelberg Catechism. And I got to know Paul pretty well, and we discussed things a lot, hours and hours and hours discussing. He would come and listen, and I called him the elder because I would bounce things off of him. Being Dutch Reformed, he had things wired. Matter of fact, I think he, like a lot of those Dutchmen, they're like the Germans. Sometimes they over-engineer things a little bit. If you haven't had a BMW car, or if you have had, or you've driven one, you know what I mean when I say over-engineer. BMWs are over-engineered. I wouldn't get one for that reason. But they do their Christianity the same way. Does that serve a purpose? Yes, it does. A very good one, even if we're not Dutch Reformed, because God provided them to show us what some of the particular things are and how they fit together. Well, the same thing is true with the Westminster, but not as much, I don't think, as the Heidelberg Catechism. The Westminster I'm more familiar with. Well, that's what the Catechism is. Question 223, Constitution of the United States. Has the President any other power? Now, he's building, see, upon the answer to the previous question. That's what a catechism does. And the answer he's building on here says the President has the power to make treaties with other nations. And then he says, well, has the President any other power? Answer, yes. Yes. The power of nomination and appointment. The power of nomination and appointment. Well, then what's the natural question that would arise from that? Well, a nomination of what? An appointment of who, right? So the next question, 224, is, what do you mean by nomination and appointment? You see how a catechism works? It just keeps expanding. You state the principle in simple terms, but then what does it mean? And the questions keep answering the questions that the previous answer begged. That's what some people say. Well, that begs a question. What nomination are you talking about? Well, answer. When persons are to be employed to do the duties of certain great public offices, like Supreme Court of the United States, none can be so employed but those the President first nominates. Nominates. Now, why do we say, what in the world does nominate mean? What's a Latin-based word? Nomen. You've heard the word maybe nomenclature? That's a Latin word. We use it in English. What does it mean? Nomen means name. Name. To nominate is to name who you want to be in the office. The justices on the Supreme Court has become undignified in many ways. Some people there are trying to maintain the dignity, but it has become undignified and to reduce now to women cat fighting. Yes, cat fighting. You say, well, there's only one real problem. That's the one Joe Biden appointed, and her name is Jackson. And she's nuttier than a bed bug. If you haven't seen what a bed bug does, you don't know what nutty is. You ever watched a bed bug? Well, I hope you never have to. Why would you want to be around a bed bug? Once you get those critters in your house, good luck getting rid of them. I never knew what a bed bug was. And I was a boy, we were out swimming in the pond one time, and the Fane boys were over. And, of course, we'd strip down to where we were stark naked as jaybirds. And we did run into the water. And I remember old Stan Fane. He didn't have any clothes on, and he was doing like a dolphin. You can imagine what that would look like from the posterior end. He was just 14 years old or something, but I can still picture that in my mind. Funny as all get out. But I said, what do you, then he came up out of the water. I said, what are you doing? And he said, that's the Irish washerwoman. I said, why do you call it the Irish? Well, he said, that's what my dad called it, because it looks like you're thrashing yourself in the water to wash yourself off. And I said, well, it looks rather odd. I wished I'd have had an iPhone to take a picture of that one. We didn't even have video cameras back then. Had 8mm cameras, but I didn't know anybody that had an 8mm camera. I'd heard of them. Boy, things have changed. Well, I've gone in my lifetime. I remember listening to, what was his name? Burl Ives one time when he was older, and he was speaking. Well, I listened. I wasn't there. But I saw a film of it, him speaking in London at a big auditorium someplace. And he was looking around. This is back in the 80s maybe or something. And he said, you know, it's almost uncanny to my mind to look around at all of the things that, all the technology we have now, me standing on stage and the microphones can pick up my voice. And he said, when I was growing up, when I was a young man, we had lived the way people lived for the previous 100 years. At that time, been 100 years when people first got to where I lived. And we drank water out of wells. We pumped water out of wells. We had root cellars and kept our root crops in the cellar from our garden. That's what we ate in the winter. We canned our food if we could get jars. We butchered hogs, and we cut wood and burned it in the stove unless somebody brought in a load of coal, which sometimes they did, a few coal mines around. And to go from that to this, it boggles my mind. There was just no electricity. We had oil lamps and kerosene lamps, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I remember that too. Now, we did have cars when I was growing up, and men had tractors, but half the farmers in the country when I was little were still using horses. It's just odd. Now, my father was progressive. If something new came out, he wanted it. And when tractors became available, he wanted to get his hands on enough money to get one, and he did. You heard me talk about old Alice. We called her Old Alice. In 1948, it was 47, Alice Chalmers tractor, and he traded his team in for that. He worked in an oil field and farmed, and he tried to use that to work in the oil field, but it didn't work. He could farm with that, Alice. We had that all the time I was home. It's still sitting out there in the woods someplace. We had that all the time I was home, and that was one I drove most often, but he couldn't use an oil field because he worked by himself. He couldn't handle the cables and the clamps. When he'd pulling rods out of the wells, he'd talk to the team of horses and they'd do what he told them. But once he tried to use a tractor, he had to get on the tractor and had to put it in gear and throw the clutch, and they'd pull up a little bit, and he'd have to get off and handle all the clamps and the cables and the rods and lay them out and then get back on the tractor. And he couldn't go as fast, you see, working by himself. That was a two-man job. Well, the reason they hired him, because he was cheaper, he was just one man with a team of horses. As long as he could talk to his horses and say if they couldn't get footing where they were muddy, he'd just say gee, and they were a very gentle team, and they'd just sidestep to the right. He'd say haul, and they'd sidestep to the left, and he'd say get up, and they wouldn't just rush ahead. They'd ease in, two dapple gray mares. They'd ease into the harness, and then they'd just slowly start pulling, which you want to do when you're dealing with pulling rods out of wells. Well, he couldn't do that with Alice. So finally, of course, he was progressive. He got that as soon as he thought that he could get electricity. He was trying to figure out how to get pumps in place, and we were digging water lines and trying to figure out how to get up electric fence and all those kind of things. Yeah, Dad was always progressive. He wanted to do the upcoming thing. You know, he learned how to brush his teeth and all sorts of things. That was during the war. Saved all his teeth, too, pretty near all of them, by the way. He's 99 now, 99. I'm looking at the lamp, one of the lamps we had at home. It's sitting over there. I keep it with me. Still got kerosene in it. You know, has the globe on top. The only hassle with lamps is it's easy to do. I mean, turn the lights on, light the lamp, no big deal, and enough light. And you don't have to pay electric bill, by the way. But the drawback to lamps is you got to take time to take those globes. They're about this long. They're shaped like this. You know, they keep the wind from blowing the flame out, and you have to wash them every once in a while. And you got to be careful with them because they're thin and they break. But you got to wash that soot out. That's hard to wash out. It's hard to get in there and wash all that out. Somebody come up with a chemical that didn't hurt you to wash those out. Personally, or some kind of an arrangement where they wouldn't get sooty, I just soon have lamps with electricity. But then on the other hand, if you don't have electricity of some kind, you don't have internet, and I couldn't do this. See, I'm progressive. I want internet. I want to be able to communicate. Well, Paul, the other elder, he used the Heidelberg, and this is an effective way of teaching, and the Bible speaks of the Catechism. Matter of fact, the Bible says in the Old Testament, in Genesis, when Abraham, remember Abraham? By the way, Abraham's the one that people say about Israel. Oh, him who blesses Israel will be blessed, and him who does not will not. Don't ever say anything negative about Israel. No place in the Bible does it say that. No place. I'll give you my testimony. I've looked. No place. What does it say? It says those who bless Abraham. Abraham was not Israel. Abraham was an Assyrian who fathered all of the Arab nations and the nation of Israel. Well, what is it that God says you're supposed to bless? Listen to me. You should do this. Because if you bless Abraham and his seed, singular, who's that? The Bible tells us that's Jesus Christ. You bless Abraham and his seed, singular, then you will be blessed. You will be blessed. If you curse Abraham, and he's an Assyrian, and from the Babylonian states, namely if you curse Abraham and his seed, Jesus Christ, you are cursed of God himself. Who curses Jesus Christ? Who says he was born of a whore and his father was a Roman soldier who had committed adultery with her? Who says that? That's cursing Jesus Christ. Who says that Jesus Christ is the second greatest prophet? That's cursing Jesus Christ, saying something of him that is contrary to what he says of himself and what the Father says by good evidence in the book recorded of his testimony. Now, there are two great world religions. One of them says he's the second greatest prophet, and the other one says that he's son of a whore. Well, bless. What does it mean to bless? Now, see, we could use the catechism method. Bless Abraham and his seed, singular, Jesus Christ. Well, how do you bless? See, that's the next question. If I were going to write a catechism, I'd say, what does it mean to bless? Well, I'd say the Bible says it means to good spell him. Good spell. Say a good word. The old Anglo-Saxon way of saying it is good spell, as opposed to the curse, which is a bad spell. My grandma and them, they used to say, the older folks say, well, old Charlie, he's taken a bad spell. A bad spell? Oh, I heard that all the time. What's a bad spell? That means he's sick in a sick bed. That's what that means. He's in the sick bed. He's had a bad spell. What does that mean? That means he's under a curse. That's really what that means. Did they mean that? Well, yeah, kind of. A bad thing happened to him. He's under a bad spell. Well, what's the opposite of a bad spell? A good spell. And we shorten it to the word gospel. A good word. Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. A discouraging word? Yeah. Where seldom is heard a discouraging word. That's a bad spell, you see. Don't say anything bad about Abraham or his seed. That's what the book says. Was Abraham a sinner? Yeah. You ever read the story of his life in the Bible? You go read it and tell me what you think. Oh, it's bad. but don't say anything bad about him. He did some bad things. Oh, yeah, but you did too, and so did I, and thought some bad thoughts, but Jesus Christ cleansed him, his seed, from his loins, born of the Virgin. See, 1, 2, 3, 1 to 14 times 3, 7 times 42 no, not 42 generations. Oh, shucks, how many? I'd have to count them, but a number of generations later, Jesus Christ, don't say anything bad about him. He justified his father, Abraham, his ancestor, Abraham. He paid the penalty for Abraham's sins, just like he did you. I hope he did, yeah. If you're chosen of God, he has. Well, that begs the question. Let's see what other questions are. What do you mean by this? When persons are to be employed, by what? By the nomination our Constitution says that the president may make. Notice, when it says the president makes a nomination, that is how he goes about doing the office of president. Our Constitution of the United States is about how, the courses and processes we use. Nobody can be on the bench of the Supreme Court or in the president's cabinet, according to our Constitution, unless the president first tell the Senate of the United States who he wants, name them and say, this is the guy I want. And he has to name them. He has to identify them. He has to tell the Congress of the United States, and especially the Senate, who they are. This is true also of presidents. Don't be stupid, friends. I try not to be. God help me. I know I am sometimes, but listen to me. Don't be stupid. That means thick and slow. Thick and slow. Jesus Christ said to his 12-man jury, the disciples, he said, don't be thick and slow. Don't be stupid. That's really what he said to them. How slow, he said to them, you are to believe, when you've got all the evidence of who I am, but you're still slow to acknowledge the proof. And without proof, we are to do nothing. We build our lives on evidence according to the Bible, and to do anything else is paganism. And what is the evidence? What is the evidence? It is that book we call the Bible. That is the testimony, the affidavits, the evidence of what God has asserted. Well, Catechism is good. Talking about Abraham, it says that 5 kings, I believe, got together and kidnapped his nephew Lot and took all the women, the children, as spoils of war. Women are spoils of war. Did you know that? Oh, yeah, children too. Always have been, still are. Women are spoils of war. Why? Because that's the reward of men that want to abuse women. That's what that is, and more. It's always been that way. It's always going to be that way, friends. Men, like men that are out of control, rape women. Let's just be frank about this. Men that are not restrained outside from the Spirit of God or of, in military context, of their officers in war, they rape women. Oh, do they? Read history. They are the spoils of war. That's why the militia is so important. That's why men are to be the protectors of their wives and children. We're to go all out and do it. God help us. Well, Abraham went after Lot and his wife and his children and his servants and the wives of the men that were with him, the rest of the family. And it says, the Bible says he split his force into two parts. Smart move. Good military strategy. And attacked the camp of the enemy of those kings and annihilated them and got everything back, the booty, the goods, the belongings, and the relatives, along with all the women and children. Got it all back. Yep. But it says that those 318 men that he assembled, those are his crack troopers that were in his massive household. They had a lot of wealth, not in gold and silver so much, but just a lot of livestock, and that was wealth in those days. Matter of fact, the word stock, like stock of a corporation, that's from livestock. That's where that word comes from, because there was a time not too long ago when flocks and herds were the measure of wealth, even in our own country here. Even if there was money, if a man had flocks and herds, my granddad used to, my mother, she said, her father, Dad just likes to look at those cattle out there grazing. And I said, and I still say to her, she's 94 or 93. Let's see. Oh, she'll be 93 this year. Oh, she is 93. Yeah. I say, Mom, that's natural. Of course she likes to look at the cattle. He used to get down the floor as a boy, until I was a teenager. He'd be over at his house. We'd get down the floor, and he'd get out his manila envelopes, and he'd pull out all of his pedigree papers for his bulls. He'd show them to me. Why? Well, he wanted to show me that he didn't go to the sale barn and get knotheads for livestock. That was a sign of wealth to him. He'd been around animals and farming all his life, and it was a sign of wealth. And it was. Oh, he did like to look at his cattle grazing. I like to watch animals graze. I can see the cattle grazing on the hills at early dawn. I can see the campfires smoking at the breaking of the dawn. Men write about those things. That's a song. I can hear the Broncos nicker. I can hear the Cowboys sing. I like to be in Texas when they round up in the spring. That's why are men that way? Because God makes them that way. It's natural to want to enjoy the land, and without land, we can't enjoy life as much. That's a fact. You're sucked into the law of the city. God has given us land. As Americans, we're to be loyal to it. What do you mean by nomination and appointment? Oh, by the way, I'm not getting to the point. 318 men, Abraham. And it says, and the King James says this, 318 trained men. 318 trained men. Well, that Hebrew word translated trained means, I always thought growing up it meant, well, they were trained in how to use swords and spears and javelins and how to whoop the enemy. No. That's not what it means. 318 trained men. The Hebrew word means catechized. Catechized. They were men who had grown up and they had been catechized. It doesn't say what catechism, exactly what was taught, but we do know they were taught truth, intended to be taught truth. It may have been catechized in the use of arms, but we don't know. But we know that the learning method they used was a matter of questions and answers that they learned. And that's proven to be ancient and effective way of training people. Miss Francine, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
I'll bet, and I think you told me this, you were catechized when you were growing up. Is that right?
Well, I suppose.
You learned answers to questions when you were in
Yes.
religious training. Yeah. And by the way, even if the Catechism, I don't agree with everything Stansbury says here. I think maybe I could have said it better, or, of course, that's the way it ought to be. But if a person is catechized, it does do, here's a great advantage, even if some of the stuff isn't exactly right, it does train the mind to follow a pattern. It disciplines. And when it says train's not a bad, in the King James, trained, said he trained those men, is not a bad translation in the sense. Catechism does train. It brings things to you so you react naturally, you know the answers naturally. Military men go to boot camp in America. They did at one time. All Army, Navy, all learned the same 11 general orders. Memorize them. And if some officer stopped you, or anywhere saw you in ranks, wherever you were, and said, give me your 7th general order, you better be able to just spout it off. You learn them so well that you could say them if somebody had a gun to your head. What's your 4th general order? That's because they were catechized in them in boot camp, and it's second nature. It's being trained, and being trained, it's an important word. That means that what you're trained to do, you don't think about. It's just like breathing. I remember reading about the astronauts that were blasted into outer space. I forget which ones, but when they first put them on the launch pad for the trial runs, which they do lots of, for the first trial runs, they had them some of them hooked up to monitors to monitor their heartbeat. And when they got for the first trial run to be blasted off, their heartbeat just started speeding up. And every time they went through another trial run of the blast off, the heart rate was a little lower. And by the time they finally did the blast off, their heart rate was absolutely normal as they were sitting there. Why? Because they were trained. That became second nature, everything they were to do. They didn't have to worry about it. They were trained. Training brings a second nature reaction to stimuli. If you're sword trained, or you're martial arts trained, you don't think about your next move. When your opponent does a certain thing, you naturally do another thing. You do a counteraction. Up or down, see, all that. Well, even more important than all that is to be trained to understand who God is and how he wants you to respond in life every moment to the things that happen to you. Well, the Catechism is a good start. What do you mean by the powers of nomination and appointment? When persons are to be employed to do the duties of certain great public offices, none can be so employed but those whom the president first nominates. Again, he must name them, know who they are, say who they are, identify them ascertainably so that the Senate of the United States can do some serious research into who this fellow is and where he came from. We've had 2 presidents of the United States recently. We don't know who their fathers are. We don't know who Obama's father is. We've been trying to fight that for a long time. You know, I remember back in the 50s, there was a man who wrote a book called, listen to this, and it was a famous book. You can look it up. The name of the book was The Magic Negro. The Magic Negro. Go to the internet and look it up. And what he said essentially in that book, there would arise in America a man of color, and political correctness would promote him. He'd be like Melchizedek of the Bible. He would have no beginning and no end, and nobody would know where he came from. He'd come out of the blue, and he would become the leader of the nation. Wasn't said very much, and because of people, I suppose, fearing accusations of racism. But this is a matter of history. This is a matter of what happened. The book was written. To understand the times of the 50s, that book would be worth reading. Not that you would agree with it, but you would learn what people were thinking. But there's only one person who God is authorized to rule among men, who has no beginning and no end. God is his Father, who is eternal. Bill Clinton was that way too. People never did. People said, oh, Bill Clinton's father was JFK. You know, that was one of the theories. And there were many others. But the left picks weirdos, promotes them, puts them in positions of power, and controls them like puppeteers. They're not their own men. They say, well, he's going to get his. Trump's going to have him indicted and have his carcass thrown in jail. Well, maybe. But a lot of damage has been done. I was just thinking this morning, going through my head, I think back, all of the desensitization that Bill Clinton did to our children back when he was in the Oval Office. It was terrible. Oh, I remember what was said in the news and the things that were talked about that should have never been raised or talked about in public. You desensitize people like that, you know what will happen to them? In that instance, it came to sex, public displays of sex, and Monica Lewinsky. It desensitized everybody, including young people coming up, of what has happened. Even among circles of people who know better, it's created a catastrophic change of perversion, of sex, and girls, and abuse of females. It's subtle, friends, but it happens. We are not to be a part of that, and if you're a part of that in any way, they all came down to a couple of weirdos who were not only, like Obama, not only sex perverts and drug and dope heads, they were sex perverts of the worst kind. That's not even debatable about him. He didn't care who he had sex with his whole life. Male, female, probably anything else, children, animals, I don't know. I just know it was a lifestyle that made no distinction between men and women. And that's the leader of our country. And then appoint people like that to the Supreme Court, the final court of last resort, and Supreme Court so-called justices performing marriages like Ginsburg did between girls, two girls. A country that does that won't last. Why? Because it's contrary to the laws of nature in creation and the laws of nature's God in the Bible. Well, when persons are to be employed to do the duties of certain great public offices, none can be so employed but those the president first nominates, names, so they can be researched, that is, proposes to the Senate of the United States, and whom the Senate consent, and to whom the Senate consent to be employed in such offices. When the Senate has given this consent, the persons cannot act in their own office till they receive orders to do so from the president. This is the process, you see, of our common law. Such an order is called their appointment. And when put in writing, it is called their commission. Now, this became real important when Tom Jefferson took over as U.S. president from John Adams. I believe it was. Is that right? I think so. This procedure, number one, the president must name who he wants for the office of, for example, Supreme Court. He must name them, identify them to the satisfaction so they know who he is to the Senate of the United States. And when the Senate of the United States then has given consent to that person still has no authority to act in that office until they receive orders from the president to do so. What if the president nominates somebody, names them, reasonably ascertains who they are for the Senate researches them, does an investigation, questions them in hearings before the Senate, whatever they want to do. That's number two. And says, we say this man's okay, we put our stamp of approval on him. He still has no authority until the president appoints him. What if the president, after all that investigation, after the Senate puts their stamp on him, the president says, second thoughts, I don't want that guy. That could happen. Why this procedure? This is why our common law is so important. Our common law is process, due process, how things are done, because it gives everybody involved, everybody concerned, a chance to say, hey, wait a minute, stop the machinery. I see something that isn't right. And if you don't slow the machinery down, due process slows the machinery down of the courts, of the government, so that it cannot act quickly and railroad things through without everybody knowing. All of us should be involved in watching and say, whoa, 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 whoa. Obama does not fulfill the requirement of the Constitution. He's not a natural-born citizen. He does not fulfill the two prongs of what natural birth is understood to be by the ratifiers of our Constitution. No. He can't run. Tom Cruise can't run for president. Why? Because he doesn't satisfy the two requirements. Jindal can't run. All these people ran for president. He can't run because he has not satisfied the two requirements of being natural born, according to the understanding of people that ratified the Constitution. All that's true. We're not paying attention. Slow the machinery down. Wait. You can't send me to prison. You can't put me on death row. I'm entitled to counsel. A lawyer to defend me in trial. I just read, a friend sent me something yesterday about, I forget how many indicted defendants, indicted for crimes in New Jersey or someplace back east along the left. Well, you got the left coast, and then you got the east coast. It's like the left coast, but it's not the left coast. As you look at the country and the map, it's on the right. All those places back there now, in my mind, just mushed together. It was back there somewhere, and maybe it was 70-some defendants, criminal defendants, they just turned them loose. Because the law in that state says if you can't get counsel to them, they can't afford it, and you can't get it to them within 7 days, then you got to turn them loose, because the Constitution of the United States says you have a right to counsel. So they went out during that 7 days and tried to find lawyers who would donate their time to defend these people. No lawyer they could find volunteered. Why? I know why. Well, number one, they got to make a living too, but number two, they want to force the government to hire more judges. That's really what we need, more judges. And somehow provide attorneys. These public defenders, federal and state, are overloaded. Federal public defenders aren't as overloaded. They're making a lot of money, and they're not helping anybody. By and large, they're not helping anybody. I just give you my personal testimony. I've watched state public defenders. There might be more sincerity there, but there is no way. I've watched. There is, even in the rural places where I live, in the Wabash Valley, right here where I am now, nowhere is it possible, no way, that these state public defenders could possibly give any attention to the myriad of cases they pile on them. And they don't pay them that much either. This is Brent Howland Winters, commonlawyer.com. Commonlawyer.com. Miss Francine's going to play us a song. Miss Francine will start with question 225 next time. Oh, let's just start with at the end of 224, 225. Make sure we lead into 225, and we started with question 1. There are 333 questions in this catechism on the Constitution of the United States. I like it. It just tells things that you need to remember and kind of know. We go over, and maybe something I'm saying here you remember, but it's up to us to make sure the machinery gets slowed down and we're able to watch what's going on. If there's anything that God hates, read the prophets in the Old Testament. Oh, just over and over and over. The injustices that courts of Israel commit and the government. That's what the prophets rail about mostly. That's what Jesus Christ railed about to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They were in charge in Israel, and they were destroying justice and reaping incredible money out of it, devouring widows' houses and estates of women who had no one to defend them. Again, this is Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, commonlawyer.com. Join us for our law courses at Winters Inn, INN.